Alright, bitches. Chapter 3. It's getting juicy. We're gonna go up the mountain. Maybe, unless they're all pussies. Alright. After inspecting the cut on her son's forehead, however, Jilla simply smiled and shrugged. It was nothing serious, she said, and could be attended to at home later. All children had to put up with such things at one time or another. Rowan knew that her words were for him as much as for strong John and Marley. She was reminding him to be brave, as befitted a child of Rin, and not to fuss. Rowan knew that Jilla was worried about his nervousness and frailty. He had overheard her telling strong John so outside their house only a month or two ago. She tried to be patient, Jilla had said, but Rowan was so different from herself and from his father, and even from sturdy little Anard, that it was sometimes very hard. She did not understand him. She wished his father was alive. Rowan had crept away and scuttled upstairs to the room he now shared with Anard. He had lain on his bed for quite a time, not really thinking about anything, aware only of a dull ache in his chest. So now he stood beside his mother with swimming head and burning eyes and said nothing. He longed to throw himself into her arms and cry for comfort, but there would be no comfort there, only shame. "I told you Sheba was a waste of time," Brondon was saying, half in triumph and half in exasperation. "Now she has two of our best cheeses in her grubby paws, and we are none the wiser." "Never mind," Alun said, shrugging. "We decided to try her, and try we did. Now a new decision must be taken, for we cannot all climb the mountain. Who is to go?" "I will go," shouted Brondon. She glared at them all as though daring someone to oppose her. "Why not?" Strong John said. "No one doubts your willingness, your courage, or your right, Brondon. As I presume, no one doubts mine. I too will go." Rowan's heart felt as though it was being gripped by an icy hand. He remembers Sheba's words. "The mountain will not test your strength, John. It will destroy it." "No," he gasped. His mother's hand tightened on his arm. "And I," said Marley firmly, her eyes on Brondon. Val and Ellis had been talking quietly together. Now Val raised her gruff voice. "Until the mill wheel turns again, we have no work to do," she said. "So we will join you on the mountain. Better that than sit idle, waiting." "You could do a bit of house cleaning for a change," Alun teased. Val stared at him coldly, while some of the other villagers exchanged amused glances. Everyone knew that Val and Ellis did not like anyone to make fun of their fussy housekeeping. "This is madness," cried Neil the Potter, unable to keep silent any longer. "This is no laughing matter. Brondon, John, Marley, Val, Ellis, the strongest of us. Going into the unknown," he appealed to the crowd. "If they do not come back, these hotheads, how are we to survive? What will happen if the Zebak invade once more, or if some other dreadful danger threatens?" "Another dreadful danger does threaten, Neil," Old Man said. "Right now, as we stand here, perhaps the most dreadful we have ever faced. And to save the village from it, some of us must journey into the unknown. That is exactly why the strongest must be the ones to go." She turned to John. "Still, I think the party is too small as yet. You need one more." Alun stepped forward. "I agree. I will join the company to make the numbers even." He saw Brondon open her mouth to object and went on quickly. "Ah, Brondon, I know I am only half-bred of Rin, and my strength may not match yours, but I am not quite a weakling. I have mastered, I think, all the skills the journey will require, and I have other gifts to offer, thanks to my father's blood. A cool head for one, a good way with a campfire for another, and a stock of songs and jokes that will not go astray. Besides, with the millers absent and no flour to be had, How else will a poor baker occupy these next few days? You could come and dig my garden, Olun, piped up Sarah, his mother. There was a shout of laughter from the people around. The old woman smiled. Only Rowan and Olun saw that her hands were gripping her apron, twisting the white cloth, and that her eyes were twinkling not with laughter but with unshed tears. She had lived long enough to have heard the old stories of the mountain and to fear its power, and Olun was her only child. But like a true daughter of Rin, Sarah knew how to hide her feelings. Only once, many years ago, had she let down her guard, and that was when she fell in love with the man who would become Olun's father, a laughing, brown-eyed singer who came to the village one autumn with a troop of travellers. Rowan had heard the story many times, but the thing had happened many years before he was born, when his mother and father were children themselves. It was part of the village history and was repeated every time a tribe of travellers came to camp nearby. Rowan could imagine the shock it must have caused when it became known that Sarah, the sensible village teacher, would leave Rin to marry a footloose traveller. Most people were horrified and tried hard to make her change her mind, but she would not be persuaded, and when the travellers moved on, she went too, leaving the peace and security of her old home to wander with the man she loved and his tribe. The people of Rin saw Sarah a few years after that, when the travellers chanced to come their way again. The small, cheeky-faced Olun was toddling after her by then, and her happiness was in her face for all to see. Some shook their heads and said her smiles would not last, and they were right, though not for the reasons they thought. For then came the 5-year War of the Plains, when again the people of Rin, the Maris folk, and the travellers themselves were forced to join in battle against invaders from across the sea, their ancient enemy, the Zebak. As their ancestors had done before them, they at last drove the Zebak from their lands, but the battle was long and cost many brave lives. One of these was Sarah's husband, Sarah. Sarah brought her young man back to the village after that. Without her man, the travelling life had no sweetness for her, and she wanted to settle again with her own people in her old home. But home for Olun was the coloured tents of the travellers, the smell of campfires burning in the night, open plains, forests, and winding roads that seemed to have no ending. Slender, dark-eyed, and curly-haired, Olun was the image of his father, and very different from the tall, strong children of Rin. Under the teaching tree, with Brondon, Gilla, Val, Ellis, and the others of like age in those days, he held up his head and smiled at their glances, nudges, and whispers. Outside school, though he worked hard to seem as like them as possible, he soon learned that his strength was no match for theirs, and that his wits were his best weapon. Rowan had often felt that Olun might be the one person in this village who understood how he felt, as he too was weaker and different from the others. Not that Olun had ever said so, but when he visited the house with Marley and Strong John, he often joked with Rowan, and took an interest in what he was doing and made excuses for his mistakes. And now Olun was to climb the mountain, trying yet again to prove himself a worthy citizen of Rin. John and Marley were looking pleased, and Brondon was rolling her eyes at Val and Ellis, clearly not liking the sixth member of the party, but unable to think of a good reason to deny him. Funny, easy-going Olun the baker was going to vanish with the others into the secret maze of cliffs and forests that rose above them. Once more, Rowan remembered Sheba's mocking face. "Ah well, if you must go, you must. My weeds will have to thrive for another few days." Old Sarah was calling, smiling and flapping her hands in mock despair, while her eyes still shone with tears. "Bless you, mother," said Olun. His tone was light, but the love and admiration in his words were clear for all to hear. "Now," said John hastily, for he was a man embarrassed by strong feelings openly expressed, "I suggest we go home and make our preparations for the journey." Then a good night's sleep should be had by all before the dawn is upon us. Agreed? The others nodded. The villagers called out their good nights and began slowly to move homewards. Some felt comforted because something was being done to solve the problem that had come upon them so unexpectedly to spoil the calm progression of their days. Some felt excited, even envious at the thought of the great adventure awaiting the chosen ones. But many, like Neil, went to their beds that night with heavy hearts, because the leaders and heroes of the village were going on a dangerous quest for their sakes and might never return. When Anard had finally fallen asleep, exhausted by the excitement, Rowan lay awake in his bed, looking out the window at the huge bulk of the mountain. The moonlight was very bright, but the mountain loomed black against the sky, secret and full of mystery. Jilla had cleaned the cut on his forehead, but his head still ached, and Sheba's during works of warning tormented him. He tried every way he could to turn his thoughts to pleasant things, to Star, to the new calf soon to be born in the herd, to the taste of cool blue juice from the hoopberry press, and to the memories of the mother of his babyhood, a gentler, happier Jilla, singing to him. But always, just as he was about to fall asleep, the other, darker thoughts came creeping back and made him afraid to close his eyes. Finally, he did sleep, a shallow doze filled with nightmares. He was back in Sheba's hut, but now its 4 walls were made of rock, dripping with water and slime, and Sheba was huge, her nose long and pointed, her hair greasy grey tails swinging like thick ropes around her grinning face, her eyes red and piercing. Strong John and his mother stood there with him, but they made no move to help as the witch bent towards him, closer and closer, till her face was all he could see and her breast scalded his cheeks. "If you are the only one afraid, Skinny Rabbit, you are the only one with sense," she croaked, and she opened her mouth to scream with laughter, but she had no tongue, and the inside of her mouth was as yellow and smooth as cheese. Cheese. I love cheese. I love Sheba. I resonate with Sheba. Cheese fiends.